G'day guys, and welcome to another video. At the time of recording this, we're in a pretty tough time in the world at the moment with the COVID-19 pandemic happening. More and more restrictions coming in every day on what we can and can't do. I think the Port Stephens have started closing their boat ramp, so they're doing it tough up there. Lake Macquarie hasn't yet. I was going to go this weekend just with the family because we've been sort of self-isolating all week, and it's been pretty draining being inside all week, so we're hoping to go out on the lake. I don't know, we'll see. We'll hope we can get out there. If not, it is what it is. So, the point of this video, popular demand. I'm bringing you a video on how I personally have been catching jewfish. I just want to start by saying as well that I don't consider myself, this massive expert that knows everything about jewfish. There are plenty of guys out there that can catch them better than me, bigger than me, whatever. But I will say that probably about 90% of the time that I go out and chase them, I'm catching them. So I'm happy to share with guys all the things that I stick to when I'm chasing jewfish, because there are a couple of really key factors that if you stick by, your results will improve. This video is more intended for someone who's a beginner at chasing jewfish on lures, someone who hasn't caught jewfish on lures, or someone who wants to start catching them a bit more consistently. And we're generally talking in the estuary, most of the fish I'm encountering are between that 60 centimeters up to a meter. We're not talking any monsters here really, although you're a chance at encountering them anyway, and that's when things will really get interesting. We're mostly talking about the school-sized fish, or most likely to encounter in the estuary. So yeah, let's get into it. So first I'm going to talk about a couple of the factors that I look at when I'm going fishing. It's not as simple as just chucking the gear in the boat, getting on the water and going and chasing them. There's a few things that you need to stick to improve your results. So the factors that I personally look at, and there's only probably really two or three that I really stick to. And the first one is the location. It has to be a location that fish are either at hunting bait or an area that they're going to be passing through at a particular part of the tide. So how we find this is obviously with our sounder. Very important tool to have, very important tool to be able to use properly, and they make the difference between a dud session and a great session. Now, it can be extremely worthwhile spending a whole session or even a few sessions sounding out the area where you think they might be. Newcastle Harbour, for example. Spend time actually sounding around the whole place, find out what's where. For bait schools, drop-offs, holes, rock bars, marker buoys, pylons. These are all areas that can hold bait, which in turn, of course, the jewfish isn't going to stray too far from bait. So these areas are all worth having a look at. Okay, so let's say ideal day, you've sounded around, you've found a school of bait, you've maybe seen the odd arch on the bottom. So that's what jewfish are going to look like. They're going to be an arch most of the time on the bottom. Sometimes they're up higher in the water column, but when you find a school of bait and you see arches around it or underneath it, chances are they're jewfish. So you found this great looking mark wherever it may be, but the next most important factor is when are they feeding. You can find a school of jew all sitting in this area. You've started casting at them with the best lure you've got, the one you're most confident with. You put it past them a few times and they're not feeding. You need to be throwing your lure and putting them in front of these fish when they're actually feeding. Because if you're not there at the right time, you can put your lure past them and they're just going to turn away every single time. So when are we going to target these fish? It's pretty well documented that around the tide changes are the best times to be chasing jewfish. I've found that to be slightly misleading. I definitely plan my sessions around a tide change, but I've found that I get the most bites from about 2 hours and then leading up to the tide change from there. So let's say there's a high tide tonight at 7 p.m. I'd be there at 5 p.m. starting to cast. And based on my experiences, I'd be expecting to catch a jew at any time from 5 p.m. up to about 6:45. Once that water goes slack at 7 p.m, they tend to shut down for me. I have caught some on that slack water, don't get me wrong. It's definitely the lead up while the water is still moving that I've found to be the best time, which goes against a lot of theories that are put out there by a lot of reputable sources. I'm just sharing what I've experienced. Day or night does not matter. If you follow me on social media, you know that I do fish a bit at night as well as the day. That is purely because I'm a shift worker. My wife's a shift worker, and sometimes that's the only time I can go. So day or night doesn't matter. In fact, I've probably had better sessions for quality and quantity of fish in the day, surprisingly. So definitely just go out and fish for them whenever you can. Don't focus on staying up all night or being tired at work the next day just because you're out trying to catch your first Jewie. Chase them whenever you can. Around the tide change. If the tide's changing at 12 p.m. in the middle of the day, go for it. So other factors like moon, phase, or barometer, a lot of people have their theories on this. I don't look at it at all. I don't take into account what the moon or the barometer is doing. If anyone out there has worked out some kind of theory on the whole thing, let me know, because it's not something I look at, and it's definitely something I could put to the test. So you found this great school of Jewies, you've got this great area, there's bait, it's all happening, you're 2 hours before the tide change. Let's start to talk tackle. So what I use is a Daiwa Saltist X. This is a 4,000 size reel, and you don't really need a reel this size. You could use a 3,000 size reel, even a 2,500 size reel, with around 15 to 20 pound braid is usually enough. It depends where you're fishing. If you're going to be fishing real tight structure and close to pylons and bridges and those kinds of things, you might want to beef it up to maybe 30 pound with some 40 pound leader, but generally I'm running 20 pound with 25 pound leader, fluorocarbon that is, and at least 1.5 meters long to 2 meters long. I'll match that with a Daiwa TD Hyper. This rod is 7'6". It's a 5 to 9 kilo rod. Does the job. It's a bit longer. You can get those casts a bit further, and yeah, it's a nice outfit to be chasing these fish with. All right, so let's talk lures. Everyone's favorite subject. I'll look at 3 factors when I'm choosing a lure to chuck at Jewfish. Number 1 is the size. Second is the profile of the lure. Third is the action. So the size of the lure, I'm looking at things from about 90 mil up to about 150 mil, depending on the size of the bait in the water. Say you've got some yakkers or slimies, you'd be looking at obviously a bit of a bigger lure. However, Jewfish love to eat smaller bait as well. They can, some of the bigger Jewies I've caught, I've cut them open and I've found prawns about this big in them. So you need a bit of a varying size of lures. They love their white bait, their potty mullet, their bigger mullet. Like, it just really depends on what they're going to be feeding on. So yeah, lures between about 90 mil up to about 150 mil. Second is the profile. You want a good profile of the lure. It needs to be obviously shaped like a fish. Most of these lures have a good profile anyway. It is more important for the profile of the lure to match what you're trying to imitate. That is way more important than color. So I'll talk a little bit about color in a minute. But the third thing, action. So you'll notice a theme that I've got with all these lures. They're all paddle tails. And that is because the Jewie, in my opinion, doesn't use much sight to hunt his fish, especially in the Hunter River and Newcastle Harbour is generally a pretty dirty water system. So they don't really use much sight to hunt down their bait. They actually are picking up on the vibrations caused by these little paddle tails in the current, or as they're sinking or as they're being worked. These little paddle tails are flicking behind them and pumping out vibrations in the water. And that's what the Jewie's picking up on with his lateral line, and he will come and hunt that down because of the vibrations he can feel from that. I'd never really stuck to any kind of color scheme or anything like that. I like natural looking lures just because that makes me feel more confident in the lure, because they look like natural lure. But I've caught them on blue lures, white lures, pink, golden, black, you know. It's not something I look at really. So now we'll talk about probably hands down my favorite lure to chase Jewies with, and that is the Samaki Vibe. Samaki Vibelicious. So this is what I caught my first Jewfish on, and this is probably what I've caught the most of my Jewfish on, is this lure here. And the way he works, he sinks down to the bottom. When you work him up, he vibrates. The whole lure vibrates. You feel it through your rod and everything. And yeah, the Jewies definitely pick up on that, and they hunt him down. I would chuck these exclusively if I could. However, they're $20 each. And with these trebles sitting down here like this, they are pretty prone to snagging. So I do carry one, at least one usually. but they hurt when you lose them. So that's why I do use a lot of these other soft plastics with paddle tails, and they seem to do the job. But for a beginner, you know, I've caught jewfish on this lure straight by just casting, letting it sink down. As soon as I went to put a wind on it, I was on a fish. So, I mean, they're working well enough even without any angler input onto the lure. So definitely a very handy lure to carry, and almost foolproof for a beginner, because jewfish will eat them on the drop without you even working them yet. So worth a look. It's also very important for the action of the lure to have the right weight on it. So you've got to have the right size jig head pretty much, or in this case, you've got to have the right size vibe, because these vibes vary from, like, this one's 20 grams. They've got another size that's 125 mil, which also a great lure to be thrown. It's 30 grams. So when that water's a bit deeper or the current's running a bit faster, you might need to upsize your vibe to the 125 mil. With jig heads, in most areas that I'm fishing in the Hunter, when the water's ripping, you want about a 3/4 of an ounce jig head. And as it starts to slow up, your downsides, you can end up using about a 1/2 ounce. Really depends on how fast the tide's moving. But yeah, as a general rule to start out, I'd recommend about a 1/2 ounce jig head when the water is slowed up. And when the water's ripping, probably about a 3/4 of an ounce. The reason the weight's so important is because you want to be getting down to where the fish are. Usually that's in the bottom third of the water column. If your lure's too heavy, it's not going to work right. So with the retrieve that I use, it's a cast out, it's a letting it sink to the bottom, it's a slow lift up, winding down the slack, keeping contact with the line, because most of the time the jewel will hit it on the drop. So you're winding down, maintain that connection with the line. As it hits the bottom, slow lift up again, winding down as it sinks. So because the jewies are hitting it when the lure's dropping, you want that to be dropping probably as slow as possible, but still able to hit the bottom. So it's a fine line finding the right weight, because you don't want it to drop straight to the bottom again, make it look unnatural. You want it to be sort of slowly fluttering down in the current like that. So it might take some time to figure out what size is right for the right situation, but that's the goal. You want it to be dropping back down to the bottom, but at a slow enough rate for it to be sitting right in front of his face and him to decide, all right, yep, I'm gonna hit it. All right, so you got your tackle, you got your areas to look for, you've got your lures to throw. Hopefully we're not self-isolating for too much longer, because I'm going crazy in here doing videos, talking to myself. What do you reckon, Will? Do you reckon that'd catch a dewie?
In the boat.
In the boat, yeah. What about from land? They get it from the breakwall too?
Yeah.
Yeah, I reckon. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it was helpful. If you have any more questions, feel free to leave a comment or send me a message on Instagram. I try to reply to everyone. If you did find the video helpful, or you learned something new, or the videos helped you catch your first dewie, let me know. Make sure you subscribe. Help me grow the channel. We did have things planned this year that look like we have to put them off. A couple of fishing trips. We're going to Darwin in August. That looks highly likely not to happen. We had a trip down the Central Coast happening at Easter, which unfortunately can't go ahead now. So yeah, hope everyone's staying safe out there. Yeah, it's a tough time for a lot of people, so stay safe, tight lines.